Okay, so I just want to make everyone aware that I am currently recording. That is because we had several requests for people who are not allowed or are not able to be here with us today, but did have, the desire to learn a little bit more about this. So just letting you guys all know that. So in case there's questions that you would want to ask, you have that in mind that it is being recorded. So first of all, welcome. My name is Rhonda Wudtke. I am a registered nurse and an IBCLC at Unity Point Health Methodist, and that is in Peoria, Illinois. I've been a lactation consultant since 2003, and I've been working in OB since 1998. A lot of years of my life have been spent supporting parents on their lactation journeys. With the formula shortage and everything that we have been seeing, in the news and with the recalls and all of these different types of things, this is certainly a topic that more people have asked about and wanted more information on. So we're going to kind of jump right in. I would love to tell you that I have a magic pill or a crystal ball and a magic wand, but I don't. So I'm just going to be giving you guys, a lot of the basics. And some of you may find yourself still pregnant and looking into some of this information for maximizing your milk supply, or maybe you're pregnant and your journey didn't go how you would have chosen it to in the, sorry, just trying to admit someone, how your journey you thought it would go. Maybe that journey ended a little bit sooner than you wanted, and you are trying to, make sure that you are able to accomplish your goals this time. And then there's other people who maybe you're still providing human milk for your baby at your breast or chest, but you are hoping to increase that amount a little bit, or you are trying to bring that milk back all together. So let's just kind of jump right on in, and I'm just going to kind of go through, these slides with you, and we will certainly, I can answer questions and we can have a conversation. I'm going to try to leave some time, certainly for that as well. But let's kind of jump in here and go through these things first. So the very first thing I want to say is that we all have different paths. Our paths look very different in our feeding journeys with our babies. And the path that we are on may be the path that we hoped to be on, and maybe a path that maybe we didn't expect ourselves to be on as well. But you just need to know here that there's no judgment. We all, give each other grace. We all understand, that my reality is not your reality. And so I just like to always start off, topics like this, just laying that foundation. And so the first thing that I want to talk about, is, how is milk, made? And we're going to do real brief on this. And it is a much deeper dive that we would need to take to fully understand all this. But it's important to kind of have a basic knowledge of these things in order to understand why some of the recommendations that lactation consultants make are there. Okay, so we talk about breasts, having different seasons, the breast or chest development. And so, winter is the breast at rest. So that might be before a parent has ever been pregnant. That might be in between pregnancies. And then springtime, that is like pregnancy. That is the breast or chest preparing for making milk. So it's adding in all these different, tissues and parts that we're going to see here in just a minute. And then we get to summer. That is the stage of breastfeeding. Milk is removed. The more milk that's removed, the more milk that is being replaced. And that continues to happen as long as we are making that supply and demand. And obviously, there's always things that kind of come into play, some that are in our control, some that are out of our control that might affect, how that production looks during that summer phase of breastfeeding or chest feeding. And then we get to autumn or fall. And that is like the weaning, section of the season. And so what happens there is we have a lower rate of milk production because we have a lower rate of milk removal. Maybe we've started more solids. Maybe we have decreased the amount of pumping sessions that we're doing. And so what happens is then the breast starts to remove that unnecessary lactocytes, those milk making cells that we'll talk about here in a minute. If it's not being used, those die off, and then that production starts to decrease. Okay, so how does this breast or chest develop, and how does it prepare for making milk for the baby? Well, during pregnancy, that is really the only way the breast reaches maturity, is going through this pregnancy. And so during that time of pregnancy, the breast starts to add breast tissue. And that's why many times you will notice that your breast tissue really grew a lot. The lactation consultant may have asked you, did you notice any changes to your breast? Darkening of the areolar tissue, rapid growth, had to change those breast, your tank top sizes or your bra sizes. And that's because this growth of these ducts and ductules. So if we're thinking trees still, that's like the branches, we're adding branches. And then the leaves are the alveoli, or the alveolus is what the single one is of that. And so that's what it looks like in the breast. So sometimes you'll hear this referred to as all these little grape-like. So if you guys remember, if you've breastfed before or you're currently breastfeeding, you might remember when your milk supply first surged, you feel like you had all these lumpy, bumpy areas in the breast. Those were those really full alveoli. And each of the alveoli have lactocytes. Lactocytes are the actual cells inside the alveolus that are the milk making cells. Okay. And so as we go through the pregnancy, as the breast or chest continue to develop based on the hormones and all of the things that come into play, that is how our body starts to prepare. And so there's different stages of making milk. And, so if we look at the different stages of making milk here, lactogenesis 1, that's what L1 stands for. We start making milk around 16 weeks of pregnancy. But you might be like, well, I didn't leak anything. I never, saw anything. My breast didn't feel any different. Well, that's because of the hormone progesterone. Progesterone keeps that milk supply in check. So when you have the baby, when the baby is delivered and then that placenta is delivered, that allows that progesterone level to rapidly drop. Okay, so we see here we got this even keel progesterone, and then right at birth, now all of a sudden the placenta is released and we have this rapid drop of progesterone, which allows prolactin, which has been rising during pregnancy. A lot of people think that prolactin just starts to rise after the delivery, but really there's been a rising level of prolactin that's been helping to develop that breast tissue, but it's held in check by progesterone. As soon as progesterone starts to fall, then prolactin is allowed to go to work. That's all hormonal. Okay, so right here we see that it's an endocrine control or hormonal control. This progesterone and prolactin are kind of what's controlling this first stage of lactogenesis. But then what happens is after birth, after we start feeding the baby at the breast or chest, or after we start pumping, then it switches over to this autocrine control or local control. So that is control by how much milk is being removed and how much stimulation we have. Okay, we're going to talk about prolactin a little bit more, but if you notice here, that we start to see that surge in milk supply, or people talk about the coming to volume of the milk. We start to see that, generally speaking, sometime around 30 to 40 hours. If milk supply surges, after 72 hours, that would be considered a little bit of a delay. But honestly, I see that quite frequently with a lot of the birth intervention that happens in our area. So that's just a little basics on the different, the stages there that, to kind of give you a little background there. So like I said, hormone driven is what initially is happening. So this is during pregnancy and those first few weeks after birth. Our hormones still really come into play a lot during that period of time. So how frequently the baby is feeding, how frequently milk is being removed, whether that's by the pump or whether that's by the baby, that is really going to set the stage for the amount of milk that is produced. And we're going to see a picture of, like an infographic on that as well. So we know that these first initial weeks of milk production are really critical time. This is when the breast is trying to calibrate itself and it's trying to figure out how many workers do I need to have on this assembly line. If all these orders keep coming in, the breast knows it needs a lot of workers. I might even have to call in more workers because they all these orders keep coming in and I can't keep up with the request. But if we have lots of workers there and we're not removing milk frequently enough, or we're, a lot of other little things can come into play, then those workers can actually be laid off, and that's the dying of those lactocytes that I was talking about. Another thing we need to talk about is prolactin receptors. So prolactin receptors, their development is by the stimulation of the breast and the removal of the milk. Okay, so the more suckling that the baby is doing at the breast, the more milk we're removing by the pump, the more receptors that are going to be delivered or developed. And research is showing us that these first initial, few weeks of the breastfeeding, chest feeding journey are really important because of these laying down of the prolactin receptors. Okay, so think about the receptors as, what is important to establishing that long-term breastfeeding or human milk feeding, if that is your goal, to be doing this long-term. These prolactin receptors are really going to come into play. So something that we want to point out here, so remember our friend the lactocyte, that's the milk making cell. So that's what this is right here. When the lactocyte has room, there's still room for more milk in there, we have these nice receptors that are nice and even keel, and that allows that prolactin hormone to fit and bind to them really nicely. If protein or prolactin can't bind, then we see a decrease in that milk production. So over here on this one, you can see all white. That's because that lactocyte is overly full. And when it's overly full, it distorts that prolactin receptor. So you can see it's kind of off kilter there. And that doesn't allow that prolactin to come and bind to the receptor to continue that production. So these receptors are why we don't need to keep our prolactin levels up really high throughout our entire human milk feeding journey. So I don't know if you noticed on that infographic from Kelly Mom that had the different lactogenesis, the prolactin went up and then it actually started to come down and kind of stabilize. And that stabilization is able to happen because of these prolactin receptors. Then we also have oxytocin, okay? And so oxytocin, you probably have heard of this before, but this is triggered when the baby is suckling at the breast or when the pump is applied. So what happens is oxytocin, you can think of it as giving those lactocytes hugs, those little, grape-like looking, the alveolus, it's giving those alveoli hugs, and that is allowing that milk to be released to the baby. You might hear this called milk ejection reflex. You might hear it referred to as my milk is letting down. When this happens, it creates a faster flow of milk and the baby responds to that faster flow when they're at the breast. Or we might see that as sprays when we're an exclusively pumping parent. And so, when the baby is nursing, even if you don't see it, like what you see here on this slide, as this baby's feeding here and oxytocin is releasing, it's actually releasing that milk, here. And so that's why sometimes you may have some leakage you know, and have to wear pads at the beginning of especially of your breastfeeding, chest feeding journey, because oxytocin just says, hey, we got to let this milk supply release to the baby. Eventually, most parents are able to get to the point where they don't have to wear those pads anymore. Their body kind of figures out, oh, she only needs, you know, one side at a time type of a situation, unless you're pumping. But with the baby, even if you don't see it or you don't have any leaking, you are, you're like, I don't know, I don't feel my letdowns. That's okay. Not everybody does. And what happens is you can watch your baby swallows. So as the baby starts to kind of suck, 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 and then all of a sudden switches into those long pulls and you start hearing more swallows, that's because oxytocin is at work and it's triggered that letdown or that you know, milk ejection reflex. The same with pumping. You might notice when you put the pump on, you start to you know, just get a little bit, and then all of a sudden it starts coming out in sprays, and then it might go back to those little drips and then go back to sprays. You generally have, you know, more than one letdown in a breastfeeding session, but every parent's a little bit different. And if you don't feel it, that's okay. You can watch your baby swallows. You can watch what that milk is doing when you're pumping. We also have to talk about our friend, or maybe our enemy, fill. So feedback inhibitor of lactation. And so what fill's job is to keep your breast from exploding. When you're really engorged, your breast or chest might feel like it's going to explode or be really uncomfortable because of how full it is, but it doesn't. Why doesn't it? Well, because fill does its job. Fill is a protein in the milk, and what it does is it tells the breast, whoa, she is not using all this milk, so we need to really back off here. It tells the factory workers to take a break, or it even lays them off or fires them altogether. And so what we know is the more milk that's in the breast, you know, the longer it sits there, the more fill that's going to accumulate. The more fill that's in the breast, the less milk that's going to be produced. But if we're removing milk frequently by the baby feeding or by pumping, then we're not going to allow that feedback inhibitor lactation to really be accumulating. So that is going to lead to more milk production. So we want to keep that breast or chest, you know, not necessarily empty, but we definitely want to make sure that we're removing milk efficiently and frequently, and that we're not allowing the breast or chest to become overly full when we're breastfeeding and chest feeding. Okay. So basically, the golden rule of milk production is that if we have a full breast, we're going to have a slower milk production. If we have an empty breast, we're going to have a faster milk production. You know, so wanting to make sure that we're removing milk frequently and effectively in order to keep that milk flowing and help that breast or chest be able to continue to tell the body, yes, you know, we really do need this milk to continue to be produced. Keep the factory workers there, or they're not really using all these. We have a storage up, you know, our storage room is full. We're not really using this. So I think we really need to start cutting back on the amount of workers we have in the breast or chest. So that's why early feeds are so important, and why, you know, if you're in the hospital, you know, we talked about feeding 8 or more times in 24 hours. If you're at Unity Point, that's what you'd hear, 8 or more in 24. And why are we wanting to do that? Because of all the things that we just talked about there. I love this infographic here from Kelly Mom, because it does a really great job of showing when we're doing early and frequent breastfeedings, how we can get to that optimal production that we need to be at from 1 to 6 months. So if you look at here, these are the number of days after birth: 0 days, 3 days, 10 days, all the way to 40 days. And what do you guys notice? These first 3 days here, that milk production begins the exact same way. And why is that? Remember, because it's hormonally driven. Progesterone drops, prolactin is allowed to go to work, and that milk supply is going to surge, whether a parent intended to start off as a human milk feeding parent, or whether they started off as a formula feeding parent. The body doesn't know that the plan was to formula feed. The body is doing what biologically it is expecting to happen, and that's produce milk. So if we're feeding early and often, and we're getting our 8 or more feedings in 24 hours, the baby's latching well, milk is being removed well, then we see that green line continue to go up and up and up. So this band here, this green area, this is what it would be considered average milk intake for a baby in the months 1 through 6. So when we get things that lay that foundation and we get things going really well, we are able to achieve that optimal breastfeeding. That baby is able to meet those babies' 24-hour milk needs, and some, like might even be close to having more than what the baby needs, versus if we have suboptimal breastfeeding. So that could mean that we're not feeding the baby frequently enough, or going long periods of time without removing milk. Maybe it's that we're using a pacifier to hold off feedings. Maybe we're topping off with formula. Maybe we're putting the baby to the breast very often, or chest very often, but the baby is not removing milk well. And that could be for things related to position, latch, maybe related to tongue tie, maybe related to, some other, things that would like poor tone, or maybe they're a preemie, or a late preterm, all different types of things that could potentially affect that. But how many times have you heard someone say their milk supply, they just seem to lose their milk supply at about a month? It's interesting to me that that's where we really start to see, we're like, oh, right about this month, we're starting to definitely notice that we're just not quite, keeping up with it. So sometimes you are just barely making enough. So maybe you're a just enough, or you're making enough for that baby's 24 hours, but you don't have any to put in the freezer. And it's really stressful because you are always worried about if you're going to have enough milk for what the baby is going to need the next day. And sometimes parents will have that experience even when they've done everything quote unquote right, or like the breastfeeding videos or textbooks say. So, there's always outliers here, but this is the general basis of biology. So what can we do to help maximize our milk productions? Well, removing milk frequently. So from the very beginning, and if you are, several months in, making sure that you're getting 8 or more, sessions in 24 hours, whether that's feeding the baby at the breast or chest, whether that is with your pump, but 8 or more in 24 is going to be something that you probably are going to need to continue for a good bit of time until that milk supply is well established. And we would consider milk supply well established when you're able to express about 750 milliliters to 1,050 milliliters. I can put what that is in ounces, in the chat, but skin to skin, skin to skin, skin to skin. And that's not just in that initial first hour after birth. You can be doing skin to skin with older babies as well. When you go home from the hospital, if your baby's a month old, bathing with your baby, all kinds of different ways that we can get skin to skin while you're watching television, in the night, while you're reading a book, listening to things, having the baby tucked down a tank top. Those are all tube tops. Those work really great for being able to still have the baby skin to skin, but feel like you're covered in case you have an unexpected guest. Rooming in here at the hospital, keeping your baby in the room with you so that you can respond to your baby's feeding cues. You don't have to wait on anyone to bring the baby back to you. Sometimes when we had, babies that were sent to the nursery a lot, then by the time the nurse got the baby back, the baby would already be, worn itself out trying to get to the parent, versus if your baby's at the bedside, you can hear the baby starting to make some noises. You can see the baby putting their hands to the face and go ahead and reach over and feed the baby. At home, having the baby sleep in the same room as you. It doesn't necessarily have to be bed sharing, but definitely having the baby in a close proximity to you can be super helpful. Making sure that that baby is positioned as well as possible at the breast and is getting latched on deep enough. We don't think that millimeters make a difference, but really millimeters do make a difference when we are talking about milk removal and the baby being able to remove as much milk as possible. We want to make sure that the baby's doing good work when they're at the breast. So are they showing you signs of active feeding, eyes open for part of the feeding, sucking bursts of at least 10, pausing and breathing and going back to it? Are we hearing and seeing swallows? When babies are at the breast, some kiddos would be happy to stay at the breast or chest for hours a day, but really not be doing any good work. They're kind of more hanging out at the breast rather than feeding. We want to make sure that we're switching the baby to the opposite side when they're no longer doing that active feeding. And so sometimes babies will start to be doing those nice long drinking sucks and then start to kind of nibble. Give them a few minutes, and if they don't start to do those swallows again, they don't get another letdown on their own, we could use a technique called breast compression, where we're compressing down on the breast as the baby is suckling. When the baby pauses to breathe, we release. When the baby starts to suck again, we compress the breast. And so a lot of people think that it's compressing and kind of moving down towards the nipple, but it's really not. It's literally compressing. Like if you're trying to get a big sandwich into your mouth, you have to compress that down, and you're going to hold it the whole time the baby is sucking. And then when they stop, then we give the breast a break. We don't want to be pushing or compressing on the breast when the baby is pausing to breathe, because we don't want to push milk into them unexpectedly. We can also do breast massage, or kind of massaging the breast. And you can do both of these techniques if you're an exclusively pumping parent as well. Avoiding pacifiers and bottles. It's not that we're anti-pacifier, we're just really pro-food. And especially in the early days when we're trying to get milk supply established, or when we're trying to increase milk supply, we want the baby going to the breast whenever it's possible to do so. Pacifiers can be great tools for helping babies, at different times in their breastfeeding journey, or if the parent is unavailable, they're in the shower, and just, your support person needs something to tie the baby over just until you're able to put the baby back to the breast. But we never want it to take the place of a feeding. As far as bottles are concerned, if you are still pregnant, or you are new in your breastfeeding journey, trying to avoid pacifiers or bottles for about 3 to 4 weeks if possible. I know most parents are going to have to give a bottle at some point because they're going to have to return to work, but really, if we can get things off to a great start, that should hopefully, not be a problem for you. So many people are like, oh, but I want the baby to be able to take a bottle. I'm scared that the baby won't take a bottle. If we introduce that bottle around that 3 to 4 week time period, sucking is still a reflex. So baby should do fine with taking a bottle. And then we can talk more about that in another talk if you guys have, more questions about some of those things. But we want to avoid going for those long stretches without milk removal. Okay. So make sure that we're not going, overnight without removing milk, that we're not sleeping through the night, having someone take the night shift. Those are all things that can kind of sabotage our milk supply. Talking with your lactation support people, your breastfeeding peer counselors, if you're involved in WIC, the lactation consultants in the community, private practice. There's all kinds of people that you can talk with about your journey. And the earlier you call us or you come in to be seen, hopefully the easier it's going to be to help you maximize that milk supply and kind of help get things back on track if we kind of felt kind of, had a decrease or hit a little speed bump in the road. Okay. We also want to make sure we're using a quality breast pump. And I know sometimes we don't have a say in what the insurance companies give us, but can we get a hospital grade pump from WIC, or can we rent one from one of the local, places that are pump stations? Are we using the correct flange fit? If you're having pain or you're not able to increase that suction on the pump, then it might be something that we need to evaluate that. Sometimes we need to go up in size, and sometimes we actually need to go down in size. A lot of times I think we always assume that we're using something too small, when really sometimes we could be using something too big, and that can be tricky. And there's lots of good videos out there on that as well. And then making sure that you're taking care of yourself, eating, trying to make sure that you're eating well, getting enough calories in the day. Get protein, we're really finding is really beneficial, increasing your protein intake, getting sleep. I know you're not going to get probably 8 to 12 hours of sleep, right? We might feel like we need that, but at least getting one good 4 to 5 hour stretch of sleep in a 24-hour time period is really going to be beneficial, both for your mental health and for your milk supply. And then of course doing some self-care, and that can be something as simple as you sitting outside in the sun for 5 minutes, going for a walk. It doesn't have to always be something that costs money or it takes a lot of time. And here are things that can really sabotage that milk supply. Supplementing without a medical reason. There are definitely medical reasons why we need to supplement a baby. And when I say supplementation, I'm probably thinking the first thing that you might be thinking is formula. And honestly, if we can use your own expressed milk, that would be our first choice. Donor milk is another option. If you're in the hospital, that would be pasteurized donor milk. If you're out of the hospital, that might be pure donor milk. But formula is also something that we sometimes need to use when those things are not available to us. Like I said, sleeping through the night, having someone feed the baby all night long, skipping pumping sessions, skipping feeding sessions can really let Phil really go to work and tell the workers that they're no longer needed. And how long, is too long? I wish I had that answer. Everybody is different. Some people are very sensitive and really notice a drastic drop in their supply when they have 1 or 2 sessions where they went a long period of time in between milk removal, especially when it's kind of back to back. That frequent use of pacifiers that we talked about, and then parenting programs or sleep programs that encourage you to feed on schedule, or trying to get the baby to sleep through the night in ways that avoid feeding the baby on cue. We really want to be responding to our baby's feeding cues. There are certain medications that sometimes can impact milk supply as well. Anything that's meant to dry up any bodily secretion can also potentially decrease that. Certain types of birth control. And what about our work environment? If we're going back to work, are we able to get away to pump? That can be a real challenge for parents. Are you having to go back to work, at a few days, a few weeks, rather than being able to take that time off? I understand it is a challenging time for all of us, honestly, with the rising costs that we are experiencing and all of these other things going on in the world. It is a challenge, and I acknowledge that. So relactation, what exactly is relactation? That's triggering the production of breast milk, in a person who has given birth, but either who did not breastfeed at all, or they stopped breastfeeding, for whatever reason. And so there might be someone who wants to initiate that milk supply again. So breastfeeding maybe just wasn't established well in the hospital. Maybe you started to have some sore nipples. You felt like the baby wasn't feeding well or enough, or wasn't getting enough. So you started to, do some supplementation, or you started to pump less because you weren't really seeing any results for all of your hard work. And that can, be a reason why. Sometimes it's that you had to wean earlier than you had anticipated because you had a separation from the baby due to your own illness or medical procedure or your baby's. A parent who has previously lactated for a previous child might want to relactate if they're adopting or if they're having a baby via a gestational carrier, or otherwise known as a surrogate. Or sometimes a non-birth parent who had lactated previously and wants to build a milk supply for a different baby. And I think this is the one why we're really talking about relactation right now. Babies who are not tolerating specific types of formula, or those recalls and shortages, or certain emergencies that, I grew up, in Washington, and, when the water was turned off, there was no electricity. The breast pump was, gone. There was all kinds of things, going on, and all kinds of natural disasters that we would have besides tornadoes and is the one I'm thinking of. But there's all kinds of them, right? There could be hurricanes, there could be wildfires. The list goes on and on and on. You could be in Ukraine, like all of those different things that parents are finding themselves with. But things some facts about relactation: it may be easier if your baby is less than 4 months old. It's not saying that it's impossible if you have a baby older than 4 months old. It just may be easier if you had a younger baby, and if your milk supply was well established in those first 4 to 6 weeks. The shorter the distance that there was between when you stopped removing milk or stopped, milk. So if you stopped last week, it might be easier to get that milk supply to kind of resurge and come back a little bit quicker, versus if it's been several months or even a year. That could be a little bit trickier. We need to set our goals. What are your goals? Is it to be able to have an exclusive milk supply again? Is it to have a partial milk supply? Is your goal realistic? How much pumping can you actually add into your life right now? We're going to talk about what that might look like here in a minute. Are you able, to meet all of your baby's milk needs? You may not be able to, and kind of being able to accept that. But what I want you to think about, if you are able to increase it and you're able to provide, 25% of your baby's milk needs, or 50% of your baby's milk needs, that's 25 to 50% less formula you're going to have to find, or you're going to have to buy. Is this going to be an attainable thing? It may not be for everyone. I've had lots of conversations, with parents who are considering relactating, and after they learn everything about it, they decide that it's not going to fit into their family situation or their life at this time, and that's okay. It may not work for everyone because it does take a time commitment. Okay. Pumping about 8 to 12 times a day for about 20 minutes, and it may take 6 to 12 weeks before you start to get close to that goal that you have, whether that's exclusive or whether that's partial. For most parents, this is not a quick fix. There are always going to be outliers where they may just have to pump a few days and they're really going to start noticing that coming back. But the majority of parents, it may take, several days before they really start seeing that milk supply increasing, and several weeks before they get back to the ability to be meeting the majority of their baby's milk needs. So what is the key? Stimulate, 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 removing that milk. Okay. And so that is something that, the more stimulation we have, hopefully the more milk that is going to be produced. Now, there's also always outlying factors with that as well. How much glandular tissue was laid down? How long has it been? What other health, situations are going on with the parent? Were there any breast surgeries or injuries? Thyroid, polycystic ovarian syndrome, infertility, all different types of things. And this can really be the most challenging part, is finding the time to be able to get the pumping in or feeding the baby at the breast or chest. If you were wanting to relactate, a hospital grade pump is the recommended pump for you. So that would be something like the Medela pump. A Spectra is not necessarily a hospital grade pump per se, as far as the definition that we use, but it is definitely, higher powered than some of the other pumps. People always ask about the wearable pumps. Wearable pumps may do okay. They may help you to avoid missing pumping sessions. So doing a combination of pumping with a wearable pump when you're in a situation where you're not able to be attached per se to one of these pumps. But a multi-user hospital grade pump is something that is recommended. But remember, any pumping that you can do with any pump that you have is going to be better than not pumping at all. And we have to prepare ourselves, okay? Some parents find this process to be mentally and physically exhausting or draining and very frustrating. It can be sometimes a stressor on the relationship. So making sure that you're talking with your support people about why this is important to you, and helping everyone kind of get on the same page and really having those conversations, because taking the time to try to feed the baby at the breast, or doing the pumping is going to, can be time consuming. So reward yourself. You might reward yourself for a larger goal. You went a whole day where you got all 8 of your pumping sessions in, or were able to accomplish the number of minutes in a day that you were hoping to do. Or it could be a little bit, like doing it for a week, or seeing an increase in your production. Or it could be every stimulation. So every single time you pump or you put the baby to the breast, you treat yourself with your favorite little mini chocolate, or whatever that might be for you that you would consider to be a reward. It doesn't have to be a chocolate, it could be anything. Maybe it's you're gonna treat yourself to a Starbucks, or a mani-pedi, an hour away from your kiddos, whatever that might be. The goal is stimulation, not necessarily volume here in the beginning. The breast is a little bit like Amazon. We have to place our orders in order for our packages to be delivered. If we're not placing the orders, we're not going to see an increase in the production. If the demand continues, we continue that stimulation, generally the supply will come. What level of that supply will it be? I don't have that crystal ball, so I can't tell you that, but I can tell you that if you do the stimulation, you will see some increase in the amount of milk that you will be able to provide for your baby. And rewarding yourself, we all like rewards, right? So it's helpful for our mental health and our mental state while we're going through this process. So that leads us to galactagogues. Okay, so galactagogues is a big funny word that simply talks about foods and herbs that have been known to increase milk supply. It literally means to bring milk. Okay, and there's all kinds of different foods and herbs that are used naturally in cooking, and there are also things that you can purchase. But with that being said, it's not going to be a quick fix, and it's not going to be able to take the place. We can't just take these galactagogues and not do the work of removing milk. Okay, fill is going to win every time. Some natural things would be like oatmeal, flaxseed, a lot of the things that you're seeing in the lactation teas and cookies. So that brings us to these. Okay, we really don't have a lot of research about how these teas and cookies and body armors and Gatorades and pink drinks from Starbucks and really work. And honestly, these can be kind of expensive, and we don't have the research to really back it up. If you want to eat the cookies because they're good and you like them and you want to eat cookies in the name of lactation, go for it. If you noticed an increase in your supply with the use of, any of these drinks here, perhaps you were a little dehydrated, and that's really what was going on. And that's why you see that boost, because there's really nothing in these that is thought to be a galactagogue. But if you think it works for you, and it's not going to hurt anything by doing these things, certainly, I just don't want you to think that, if I try this one, or I'm going to try that one, or I'm going to do this, and you're not doing the work of stimulating the breast by feeding the baby at the breast or chest, or removing the milk, these things are not going to work. Much like if we're only able to pump once or twice a day, that's not going to be enough stimulation to induce relactation. We want to get the baby reacquainted at the breast. If it's been a period of time that the baby's been separated from the breast, we're going to need to do lots of skin to skin, bathing with the baby, doing that infant massage and having them close to the breast or chest. In the beginning, if the baby's willing to latch, they can quickly become very frustrated with the slower flow or no flow of milk there. We don't want to force the baby to do anything. We don't want to create any breastfeeding aversions or aversions to the breast or chest. We want the baby to be a happy place. If we can get the baby to latch again, we might be able to supplement right there at the breast. And that allows the baby to get the volume of milk that they need, but still be stimulating the milk production. Okay. And if we can't get the baby to latch on, could we bottle feed at a bare breast with the baby down to the diaper, doing that skin to skin? Sometimes we can use a nipple shield to get the baby back to the breast, but we're still definitely going to need to be supplementing the baby, and we're going to be needing to do some pumping generally as well. What may those feeds look like? We might have to first give the baby a bottle feeding. And so if the baby typically is taking 3 ounces of milk, maybe we would give the baby all but like a half an ounce of that by bottle, and then offer the breast to finish there. That may be something that the baby is willing to do, kind of dessert at the breast. And that can be a really helpful way of getting to the baby to go to the breast when they're a little bit more calm. As the baby's going to the breast and your supply seems to be increasing, the breast is feeling fuller, you're noticing more of those signs of active feeding, the baby is swallowing more, then we might be able to start lowering that volume that we're giving by bottle by about 10 milliliters or so, not quite a half an ounce or so, every 2 to 3 days. And if we're doing this, if we're trying to relactate with the baby at the breast, it's very important that you're being followed by a lactation consultant, that your baby, we're assessing the milk intake that your baby's doing at the breast and your baby's growth. And that, if your baby you're not around a lactation consultant, because I know there's some areas that is a challenge, definitely need to be having frequent weight checks with the baby while we're going through this. So how do we know if the baby's getting enough while we're doing this process? Are they feeding 8 to 12 times a day? The more they feed at the breast, the easier hopefully that transition is going to be. Are they happy and relaxed after most of their feedings? Are they having the appropriate number of wet and poop dirty diapers that we would expect for their age? And are they gaining weight and on their growth curve like we would expect them to be? And that's when we're feeding the baby at the breast, and we're trying to decide, is our supply going back up? Are we able to really drop down on our supplementation? So I know that was a lot of information, in a very fast pace. I'm more than willing to share those slides with you. I have quite a few different videos that might be helpful as well for your reference if you are interested in going through this relactation process as well. So Chris or Alexis, do you guys have any questions about any of that information there, or anything else that we might not have covered with that? If you do, are you able to unmute yourselves, or do I have to unmute you? Let's see.
No, I can unmute.
Perfect.
Thank you for all the information. I'm actually a pediatrician. So we've actually had moms ask about relactating who have not breastfed, and babies are 4 to 6 months of age. And so I actually spoke with someone at the Breastfeeding Resource Center who told me, and I guess my question for you is, what they had said is, attempt for 1 to 2 weeks. And if after 2 weeks you're not successful, like I know you're saying 6 to 12 weeks, if they've never like this mom had never breastfed any of her children, but was contemplating trying only because of the formula shortage. Is there a chance for her baby being 4 months old?
I mean, there's always a chance, especially if she noticed that after the birth of the baby, if she had that milk surge, her breast filled, she was uncomfortably full, then yes, I would say there definitely is always a chance. I always like to say, I don't know what your body's going to do until it does it, but unfortunately, it requires a lot of work. And so I don't think people really realize the amount of work that it does take. That's why we focused at the beginning on really getting things off to a great start. Our formula feeding families, I do think it's worth a try, but is she realistically going to get enough milk to completely feed all breast milk? Probably not, but if she's able to get to the point where she can provide quite a bit of her breast milk, or more than what she has, that might take a little bit of that pressure off for her to feel like she is making an impact. But I always talk about, what's it worth for you? Like, as far as like what amount are you wanting to be able to produce, how long are you wanting to give this a go? Because yes, 1 to 2 weeks, I think most parents don't make it even the 1 to 2 weeks. I'm working with several people right now on inducing lactation, which inducing is when someone has never been pregnant before, and they are working on, and that requires hormones and different medications sometimes, and lots of pumping and things like that. And I have someone who she's been pumping for 8 weeks, and she's just starting to get about a milliliter at a time. So I think that that's the challenge. I think that especially in our culture, we want that quick fix. We want that pill that's going to make everything better. We want that drink that's going to make everything better. And unfortunately, that's not how this works.
Thank you.
Does that help at all?
Yeah, it
I wish
does. It's just because I was realistic with what you talked about, with how much work it was going to take. I was very realistic with that at the beginning. It's just a matter of, follow through. And do I need to tell her it could take 6 to 12 weeks? Because I really only said, if you don't feel like you're getting any sort of effect or after 2 weeks, I guess I wasn't as encouraged. I didn't think to say longer than that.
Yeah. And I usually just, talk with them about, well, how are you feeling about this? Like, maybe check in at the 2-week mark, and okay, if she still, isn't getting anything, well, how are you feeling about that? How would you like to move forward, within this journey? And then, kind of having that conversation and just helping them kind of think through those things. If it is something that she says, oh my gosh, yeah, at the end of 2 weeks, I went from getting nothing to now I have, 10 milliliters or a half an ounce, then that may be something that she wants to continue and see what happens. And maybe if they're not adding any galactagogues in at that point, they could, try some of those things. But I think it's just a word that's really getting thrown around a lot, as the fix. And that's an unfair thing, to throw on to a formula feeding family. It's not something that formula feeders, if they want to try that, perfect. But if they are not, we shouldn't be making anyone feel guilted into attempting relactation, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Let me see, Alexa, was it, you're having trouble unmuting, but I have been exclusively pumping. I started out getting about 35 mils a day, pumping 9 times a day, but now due to being tired and skipping sessions, I've been pumping 5 to 6 times a day and only getting 50 to 17 ounces. Would it be possible if I go back to 8 to 9 times a day for my milk supply to go back up? My baby's 4 weeks old today. I definitely would give it a try. I never say beyond a shadow of a doubt yes, because once again, I don't know what your body's going to do until it does it. But your baby is still, young enough that, I think you have a very good a good chance of that happening. You know, definitely making sure one of your pumping sessions is overnight between like hours of 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. So if you go to bed at 10, pump right at 10, and then try to pump around 2 or 3, and then be up again by 7ish at the latest to pump, and then try to make your sessions maybe more frequently during the day. You could also experiment with some power pumping. Are you familiar with what power pumping is?
Yeah, I actually figured out how to unmute.
Perfect.
I've been trying to do that at least once a day.
Okay.
And I do have wearable pumps that we had moved and I couldn't find them, but I found them recently. So I think that'll help me not skip sessions too.
Yes, yes. So many moms really talk about that, how it's such a benefit to have that ability, or a pump that hooks on. Like, there's so many new pumps out there. We were joking about that the other day. I was like, oh my gosh, when I when I had my babies, there was like a hand pump and the pumping style, and now there's so many. I feel like there's parents every single day that are asking me about pumps, and like, oh my gosh, I don't know about that pump. I'm gonna have to do a search on it. Let's watch a YouTube video together to try to figure it out. So, but yeah, Alexis, I mean, I would say go for it and see, do what you can do. Give yourself grace. That's what I always like to talk to parents about. We don't live in an ideal perfect world, and there's going to be days that we may not get our number of pumpings in, or we may only get 15 minutes instead of our 20 minutes, but just do the best that we can, and give ourselves grace for those days that we're not able to do as much, and know that we're giving the best effort that we can.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else that either of you have before we end our time? I went a minute or two over, but I think I started a little later just because we didn't have people on the call at that time. Anything else, Alexis, that I can answer for you?
I guess, is there like a certain amount of water I should be drinking a day? Because I've been having a hard time making sure I eat enough and drink enough.
Yeah, so we usually say eat to hunger, drink to thirst. So I always say, are you still, if you're still having any of the lochia or the bleeding afterwards, it can be kind of tricky to tell. But if your urine is not light in color, if it seems concentrated or dark, or has a really concentrated smell to it, then I definitely would try to increase your fluid intake. But if you're not noticing that concentration, you're probably getting plenty of fluids in.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all I have.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you to those of you who will be watching this in the future. And my email is Rhonda.Wudtke. So RHONDA.WU, D as in dog, T as in Tom, K as in kite, E as in Edward, at unitypoint.org. So feel free to email me any questions, or if you would like any resources on this, and I will be happy to send some your way.
Okay,
All
thank
right,
you.
thank you.